welcome everybody to another episode of Voices
from the desert. This, as Murray was saying, it's like the old "Let's get ready to rumble."
That's right. I want to get an AI. I'm going to do AI. I'm going to get his voice, that guy, to do our intro from now on.
Yeah, that's right.
Are you ready to rumble? Why not, right? Notice there that I in my intro, I took Voice from the Desert and I made it go immediately into a howl. That was new.
That was good. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, that was a new thing.
Murray's got some tricks up his sleeve.
A little bit creative today.
He might be old, but he's not that old.
Old school, anyway.
Yeah, that's right.
80s were good to me.
Old compared to me. That's what we're saying. Yes.
At least in fashion.
Yeah. Well, there you go. That's right. That's right. Yeah. And
your
beard isn't as righteous as mine is. So
yeah.
So I'm like an Orthodox monk.
Yeah.
And you're a Catholic monk. That's
pretty
really
much
the difference between the two of us here.
Yeah. I don't know why it is. I don't grow a beard. I mean, I have, the weather and the farming in the winter, man, having a beard is just, boy, that helps your face. I got to tell you.
I will say
that is.
Having a beard like the one that I have, when you walk outside in the dead of January and it's -20 out, it's interesting what freezes into your beard.
Oh,
yeah.
Never even thought about that.
If there's any moisture or anything, maybe you've just taken a shower, you've put some, you put something in your beard, whatever, it immediately will crystallize. So that definitely happens.
Oh, that's an experience I've not had happen yet. I'm going to have to grow it just for that.
Just for that. That's right.
How can I understand the Desert Fathers without knowing the accoutrements of
that's right.
care?
That's right. Well, I'm pretty sure it's the Trappist.
Although in the desert, I highly doubt that they had frozen beards, but in Russia and in Romania.
That's true. That is very true. I think it was the Trappists, wasn't it? In but they would be a version of the Cistercian order, the Trappists. The Trappists, I think, are characterized by silence. Yeah, they're characterized by not 100% silence, but they limit their conversations. If you visit a Trappist monastery, they'll have a conversation with you, but it'll always be a short conversation.
Interesting.
That's my experience anyway. But they're all clean shaven.
Really?
And so yes, so
I didn't
that
know
is, and I think that's by. I'm not an expert on any of these things, but I think that's per the order, like kind of the rule of life of the order.
Really? Because the Orthodox guys, I think I told you this. It's true. I've read it. They said to this one monk, why did you, how did you come to a life of prayer? And he says, Satan taught you to pray? Yeah, because the guy was bugging me all the time, right?
Yes.
And the other one was, they asked this other monk, how did you come to a life of prayer? And he goes, unshaven young men.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
And that's why monasteries in the East made sure everyone had beards. There are great.
You're just making me think of some of the, the guys who show up to their fathers in the Desert Father movement, going, "Father, I no longer struggle with the passions," and the fathers say, "Oh, pray that God brings the passions back to you," right? And
God have mercy.
If you no longer struggle, no longer need to be saved.
Oh yeah, we're gonna have to talk about that whole difference between what they're thinking and we're thinking, because we're like, oh man, I'm relieved. I've got no more struggle. I must be holy, and they're like,
what is it? I think one of them, he says, that's because your mouth has become like an open door. The passions go in and out without any resistance.
Oh, that's horrible. So passions, everybody they meet, lust and greed and anger and apathy and pride and bitterness.
One contemporary author writing about the Desert Fathers, John Chrysosophagus or something, how you ever say his name, he says that the passions are basically our inner wounds. And the the purpose of the spiritual life is to bring healing to those, which we're going to talk about. But
yeah,
pride, lust, greed, anger, all of these, it's the interesting thing. And this is what we love about studying this kind of stuff, is that I think in my growing up context, church life and all of that, the kind of the ideas that I was given in this sense are that those, maybe we'd call them vices, right? That'd be another term that we would use. Sin. Those things are static, right? It's like, if anger exists, I wasn't so much taught that there's a reason behind that anger that's an inner wound. I was taught that just don't be angry, right? And
absolutely, and it's more
right?
and we're going to talk about this some more, but we can talk about it a little bit right now too. And it's interesting because you kind of get it in your head that this is all very judicial,
Yes.
There's a reason, the Catholics go to confession, because, man, you're going to get judged if you don't. So you better, you better confess. So, and I think for us Mennonites, we picked it up, just don't talk about it. Just, and I mean, I remember in the early days, because I guess the Vineyard was doing it. My Mennonite church started to do, and I was 18, 19 at the time, ministry time up front. And they called all these people up. I'm like, I wonder what's wrong with them. Man, oh man, good thing I don't have to go up there, because
right.
I'm perfect. I'm doing real good with Jesus. I mean, going up there, I thought, wow, boy, that's a confession. You're screwed up. Like, boy, now do I see it so absolutely differently.
Right.
But I would look at people and go, wow, I mean, what are they doing in their life that they got to confess? Like, woo. So, I mean, because follow the law. But even Julian of Norwich, who I love her writing, everybody, she's great. And anchorite from 1200s, 1100s.
I think the 14th century. So
really, that much older. Hey,
I could be. It's somewhere in there though, but for sure.
I mean, I'm just going to give the quote. I got the quote right, but I don't have the date right, which sucks.
Yeah, it's somewhere in there.
But she said, when God sees your sin, He sees your pain.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
What a great. That's good enough to say it twice. When God sees your sin, He sees your pain.
Yeah.
And I just, well, I mean, that's already such a. I mean, we could talk all day about, okay, what do they mean by that? And that's such a beautiful statement of the compassionate heart of a father right there.
Well, and sometimes what we think the purpose of the spiritual life is to produce a sinless person. And that I get, at least that was how I was.
Yeah.
That's what I gleaned in my cultural context growing up. Right, is that if I was just spiritual enough, I would no longer struggle with lust or pride or greed or envy or anything like that. And again, those were static experiences within me that I just needed to resist long enough that eventually they. I'm one guy when I was talking about it. One guy who was a little more advanced than I was. He was still a young man, but a little more advanced than I was, said, well, this is how I think of it, is sin is like a rabid dog, and the less I feed it, the more it.
Oh yeah, I've heard that. Exactly, right? Like that. I've heard that in the past. Yeah.
And it's not that actually there's an inner wound, whether it's trauma, whether it's rejection, whether it's neglect, whatever, there's an inner wound that actually needs to be healed. And the reason why I act out and lash out in these ways is because of the inner wound. It's this static sin residing within me that as long as I don't feed it, it'll eventually starve its way out. And the Desert Fathers, like I said earlier, when the disciples come and go, we're no longer struggling with the passions, the Father says, actually, you're just not aware they exist. That's the problem. And
everybody like if you, okay, what do you mean by that? Like, okay, everybody fast for 3 days and get yourself stuck in traffic.
That's right. Yeah,
see what comes out of your heart.
Yes. I mean, see if perfection is still there, right?
Because the point is that when everything's going well for us, we go, well, I must be doing great because I'm not struggling with anything. Run out of money, get cut out in traffic. Let's have the pastor not talk to you for 3 weeks. See if you're still in good. Because, under those contexts, what comes out of the heart as a desert, and Jesus would say himself, it's not the outward things that, defile you. It's the things that come out of the heart, right?
That's right.
They're looking at it so differently, and then that needs to be healed. So, anyway,
Well, I had a roommate one time who we were in a ministry school together, and we were assigned reading, and the reading was a book called Breaking Free of Rejection. And he read the first little bit of the book, and then I was in the room with him, and he threw it across the room, and he says, "This book's stupid. I don't struggle with rejection." And it was
although you just rejected that book.
Exactly. It was many years later where he realized just how deeply he did struggle with rejection. And that's the open mouth. That's like an open door. The passion's just going in and out. They're not even checked. And this is when I hear people say, well, I don't like, I've conquered fear. I don't struggle with fear anymore. I don't even remember what fear feels like. I've heard people say that. And it's like, well, no, that's impossible. That just means that you've become desensitized to it. And
well, why don't you go outside and just do some street evangelism, and when you see someone walking by, see if they need any physical healing, and see if you can do it.
Yeah. So
put yourself in this situation. Anyway, I mean, maybe they're like, I can do that easy, but
yes. So if you have lost the sense of what that struggle is, that doesn't mean that you've matured. It typically, the early fathers would say you've desensitized yourself to what the struggle itself is, because what the spiritual life produces. And this is something that took me a long time to understand. The spiritual life didn't produce in me a state of perfection. It produced in me a state of humility. And so now when I go, like I was reading Psalm 41, I've been meditating on Psalm 41, where David, ostensibly the author of Psalm 41, goes, heal me, Lord, for I've sinned against you. He says that, right? And then he describes a litany of accusations that people have lobbied against him, right? My enemy says this, my enemy says this, and he says, even my friend has turned on me, right? He says, I'm just going to turn, I've got my Bible right in front of me. So, cause I'm nice and spiritual, Yeah, he says, be gracious to me, heal my soul, for I've sinned against you. My enemies speak evil against me. They say when he die, his name will perish. He comes to see me. My enemy speaks falsehood. So I've got these accusations against me. I've got people wishing ill against me. And he says, even my close friend who I trusted, who ate my bread, he's turned against me. So David says, heal me. Here's all the ways I've been hurt, right? My enemies' accusations, my friends turning against me, all the things they've said, they're wishing ill on me. Heal me. But the real, so the issue within me of sin is an issue of healing. And the sin, the lashing out, isn't against them or myself, it's against you. Right. And so David doesn't say, take care of my enemies or convict my friend. He accuses himself. He goes, heal me, for I've sinned against you. And so he has every reason to externalize the problem, but he brings it to himself. Right. And this is where we were talking last week about getting to the point where we can talk about the practicals of the spiritual life when it comes to bridal intimacy. And we're going to do that today. But that's one of I'm just giving you a preview, right? That's one of the delights of growing in inner humility and awareness and sensitivity to the wooing of the Holy Spirit, is that I don't think other people are the problem. I think I'm the problem.
Yeah.
And so I'm actually more willing to take responsibility for my actions and say, I need to deal with my own self. And it's my inner wounds that are driving these things. I'm responding to rejection not because they rejected me, but because rejection resides within me.
Yeah.
And that's what you're pointing at. This is Moses the Ethiopian, right? Saying, when people kick him out of a service because he's black, he's another ethnicity. And he goes, why are you sick, my soul?
That's such a beautiful quote. I love it. Yeah,
why are you sick, my soul?
You're acting crazy.
You're acting crazy. That's right. Rather be thankful that God sent you a doctor in the form of these accusations.
Right? To reveal what's in your heart.
Exactly.
So that you may see it and be healed.
Yes.
I'll give you guys an example of that personal one that might fit, because it's worth, I mean, how about this first? Because we were talking about this beforehand. Like, where do we find that in scripture? Like when you see Peter at the Last Supper and he goes, Lord, I will never deny you, right? Even if everybody else will. And Jesus looks at him and says, when the rooster crows 3 times, you will deny me. And then he makes this weird statement. Now, when you've turned back, no, I've prayed that your faith will not fail.
Yep.
And when you turn back, strengthen your brothers.
Yes.
Well, we know what he does. He denies Christ.
Right.
So what does he mean? I pray that your faith will not fail. So Jesus does not see him screwing up as a failure of his faith. That's a big deal, right? I mean,
yeah.
But at the same time, he says, well, when you fall, strengthen your brothers, right? So in other words, he's gonna fall, but his faith isn't gonna fail. Like what the heck is that all about? Because if you're performance orientated and it's about doing the right thing, it looks pretty obvious that his faith fails, right? Well, when we flip over to the reinstatement of Peter, and I'll get maybe Josh, you might want to read that verse because you got it there. It's really remember, he does deny Christ. He swears he doesn't even know the man. The rooster crows. Jesus looks right at him, and Peter leaves weeping. So his heart is exposed. I mean, what's that all about? What's getting exposed there? And we're talking about pride and fear and under pressure. But it's interesting then when we see this exposure and we take that to Peter's recommissioning, and he sees Jesus and he jumps out of the boat, right? And I remember John Paul Jackson said, I think maybe it was he was kind of like, oh no, I got to face my issues now. There's Jesus at first, right? And but it's interesting when Jesus says, Peter, do you love me? Jesus uses the word agapeo, and Peter responds, I love you. Uses the word phileo.
Yeah.
Right. And then Jesus, I'll since Josh has got his Bible.
Yeah, I got it right here. I'll read it. I'll read it, and then Murray, you've got some good thoughts on that. So it's John 21 is the passage. And just a few verses starting at 15. So when they'd finished breakfast, always a great time to have a conversation, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And that's the word agape. And Jesus said to him, or Peter said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said, and Jesus said to him, tend my lambs. And so that's when Peter responds, that's the word phileo.
Phileo.
Yeah. So then verse 16, he said to him again a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Agape. Peter said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Phileo. Jesus said to him, shepherd my sheep. Verse 17, he said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Phileo. That's Jesus saying phileo.
Yeah, Peter Jesus flips it around.
Yes. Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? Phileo. And he said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Phileo. Jesus said to him, tend my sheep.
So maybe give us a good definition of those two words, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
I think phileo.
I think a rough definition.
A rough definition, yes, perfect.
Of agape and phileo would be agape is selfless love.
Yeah.
Right. It's like pure, true, authentic love for love's sake. Phileo is more like brotherly affection. And so it is both are a form of love. And this is where in the difference between the way that we use the word love, because Murray, you said before we went live, I can say I love my cat, I love my phone, I love my house, and I love my wife.
Yes.
Right now, when I say the word for love, each way that I use that in the context of every sentence means something different. I can say I love Murray, but that's a different love than when I say I love my wife.
I love vegan hamburgers.
Yes.
Is that the same?
No, not at all.
Yeah. What do you mean? You can almost say to your friends, your wife now, when you say you love me, are you talking agape or phileo? Like, what do you mean
right
within
the Greek language, they had ways of separating those things out. And then, a husband and wife would say that we're going to make love, to imply sexual intimacy, of course, right? So there's a whole other way of using the term love in that sense, right? And so we just use the same word to mean everything.
Yeah.
And in the Greek, there has these layers of meaning. and I think there's 4 different Greek words for love, I think.
Yeah.
And
something like that. Maybe even 6.
Eros is another one, agape, phileo, and I can't remember the other one, and we talked about divine maniacal eros.
Yeah.
Right. The lusting, passionate kind of love, but that's we're probably going to jump into that in a little bit. But
so I just wanted to say with this, like everyone, like a couple of things here that are really important. And Joshua, I appreciate your thoughts here too. But you look at, because I know I'm cutting you off a little bit here after you read that, but
no, you go ahead.
Well, if we just keep in mind what happened at the Last Supper, that Jesus knows when you turn back, strengthen your brothers. Well, what's he doing right now? He's commissioning him to strengthen his brothers, and he's helping him turn back. I mean, so this moment is fulfilling a little bit what he said at the Last Supper there. But okay, so how does this work then? That he said, "I pray that your faith will not fail you, but when you turn back, strengthen your brothers." And the point here is, this is how I see it. So you could argue with me. But how do those two things live together in a judicial mindset? Well, they can't. They can't live together in a judicial mindset, because when you fail, you deserve punishment. You failed. You didn't have faith. You screwed up. Therefore, but see, Jesus isn't doing that. Jesus is like, again, I pray your faith won't fail. Okay, let's take that meaning, something inside Peter's not going to fail. But when you turn back, strengthen your brothers. So it's kind of like this. Peter, you know what? When he makes that statement, God, even if everyone else fails you, I'll never turn away. How about this? Peter, you got some pride issues. You're pretty cocky, aka rooster, crowing, what he admits is, right? You're going to need to look at that, because that's kind of in your heart. And once you see it, I'm going to be able to heal that, and you'll have some humility, and then I'm going to reestablish you. So Jesus could be looking at that whole thing as a medical issue, right? Instead of a judicial issue, which is what we do to ourselves. Oh no, I screwed up, and now maybe the Lord's saying to you, you know what? We need to look at the root cause of this, and we need to get at this. And you know what? That's Peter, and I'm equal to the most eminent apostles, and in the end, I'm chief of sinners, right? Medical issue. I needed this thorn in the flesh because I'm a pretty prideful guy. And, it's my pride is hindering working out my own salvation, the healing of my own soul.
Yeah.
And Peter, you see that with Peter. He can't say agapio because he has so much guilt. He's making a judicial issue. Look what I did. Look what I did, Jesus. I have no right to say agapio to you anymore. Right. And what's Jesus saying? Peter, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. It's how I see you that matters, not how you see yourself.
Yeah.
And when we take our wounding to negate ourselves, how do we see? The problem is here, Peter can't step into a deeper form of love with Christ. He can't even say the words out loud because he's letting his past, his wounding, define even his level of love with God. Right? And Jesus is intervening, and this is a heart healing issue. And you know what? This isn't the last time Peter does this either. In Acts 10, he gets the revelation, right? Gentiles in the church. By Galatians 3, he's denying Gentiles and only eating with Jews. Right. And Paul's got to rebuke him to his face in front of everybody. So it's the same, Acts 15, he's bragging. Gentiles came into the church by my doing. And then, there's the pride again. And then there is, Acts 15. Then there's Galatians 3. And so this isn't even the end of it with him. This is a long-standing issue. Does it negate him from ministry? No. But I would say, back to Julian of Norwich quote, when God sees your sin, he sees your pain. And that's what we're looking at with Peter. And again, the church was supposed to be, and is some of the time, maybe a lot of the time, a place of healing the soul rather than a place of I must measure up or else.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, there's my rant.
Well, so let's say this. What Jesus is doing with Peter, coming this, because again, we're on this kick with talking about bridal intimacy and the bridal paradigm. What Jesus is doing with Peter is bringing him back to the place. He's forging something within Peter of selfless love.
Yes.
right? So he's bringing Peter back to himself, and he's actually building something within Peter by the way that he talks with Peter right now. Do you love me? Not do I love you, right? That's obvious.
Yeah.
Do you love me? Right? Do you love me? And then as a side note to that, the whole reason for service is because of love, not because of do you love me? If you love me, go do the thing. Because I've encountered his love, now I do. There's almost sometimes a misunderstanding when you talk with people about encountering the love of the Father and being centralized in that. It's almost like they think, well, does this mean we just sit around and have encounters all day? We don't do anything. Well, no, obviously not. If we've encountered love, we can't help but be motivated to go share that love. And then the way that we do that is the way we are uniquely called, gifted, and commissioned by the Father to do that. So here, if you love me, go do the stuff. So anyway, so Jesus is forging something within Peter, and what Jesus is forging within Peter, he is establishing within Peter what's already the content of the being of Jesus. And we said this the last episode that the proof of the cross is the proof that the content of the divine being is pure love.
Yeah.
This is and pure agape, selfless love is. So Jesus forging something within Peter. What he's forging within Peter is the divine love that's within the Godhead itself, that's proved by the cross. The content of his being right through the end of his short life is love. And Peter at that point is he has proved that the content of his being is not love. The content of he's ready to die for national pride. He's ready to go out in a blaze of glory.
Yeah,
hold his sword out. Right? He's proved that the content of his being is not. So Jesus is bringing him back to himself, and we know Job says is a very interesting verse in Job 7 where it says that God has set his mark. Job says this: "You've set your mark. You've made me your target." Right, you've made me your target, and you've set your heart upon mankind. What is man that you've chosen him? Why have you set your heart upon him? You've made me your target, right? And you come and you visit mankind every morning, and you test him every moment. So God has chosen mankind, right? He's set his sights on mankind, and he has envisioned mankind as the recipient of his heart. It says, you've placed your heart upon me. So mankind is going to receive the heart of God, being the nature of God, right? Which is the content of his being, which in the early church fathers would call the divine hypostasis. The divine hypostasis is the content of the being of God, which is pure love. Mankind is intended to receive that divine hypostasis, to become that divine hypostasis. And the content of that is pure love, which, if you look through the early church fathers, especially the desert fathers, looking back to someone like Dorotheus of Gaza, in the desert fathers tradition, or Isaiah of Scetis, the natural state of humanity is love. This is, God as much says this when mankind is alone in the garden, right? That the natural state of mankind is to give and receive love. Seeing that he was alone, he created a perfect helper, Eve, for him, meaning now he has the recipient of love and the giver of love, because mankind, the intention for mankind is to be the natural state of humanity is to be love. Now we've gone and mucked up the image. We've marred it up almost beyond recognition at this point. But the natural state of humanity is love. And Isaiah says things like this. He goes, desire is the normal state of the mind, for without desire for God, no love exists. So we think, desire is a thing that I need to destroy within me so I can reach a pure spiritual state. In fact, the actual state of humanity is that desire is pointed towards God. And this is where we talked about the state of the kind of Eros love, that the lustful passion of mankind is the twisting of the natural state of mankind, which is desire.
Yeah.
Which is the content of God's being. Jesus, it says this, right? That, but for the joy set before him, right? The natural desire of his being was joy and love for the Father and for the creation of the Father. or all of creation. So Jesus is bringing Peter back into this place of, what does it look like to be truly human? What it looks like to be truly human is to be pure love. When you're a being of pure love, what do? You take care of the people around you because you love them. But I mean, it's that's a roundabout way of saying it's a really simple, guys, right? The natural state of humanity is to love. The natural state of humanity, like the Desert Fathers would say this, and this is Isaiah of Scetis specifically, a very influential Desert Father. He says, anger as well is the normal state of the mind, because lacking anger, we're unable to achieve purity. Unless we're angered by all which is planted in us by the adversary. So anger against unrighteousness gives us the energy to pursue righteousness. So it's like we've just got this idea of the spiritual life that it's supposed to produce a person that has no struggle versus what's actually laid out by Jesus and what's actually laid out in the scriptures.
Yeah.
And this is the place of encountering the love of God, being formed by the love of God, and not inventing systems that negate the love of God. Like Psalm 5 says it. I'll just bring it up because it's so fascinating when it comes to, our contemporary models for evangelism, right? A contemporary model for evangelism, at least in the last, maybe less so today, but you still hear about it today, is, if you died tonight, where would you go? Where the gospel is characterized as a holy God that is full of wrath because mankind has contravened this holy God's directives, and all have offended God. All of this kind of stuff, right? And I said in controversial tones last episode that one of the reasons why we got a theological system that expands on the anger of God versus the love of God, and capitalizes on the anger of God, is because we was developed by people that never encountered the love of God, or at least still needed some more encounters with the love of God. Needed that moment on the beach.
I know one guy that he likes to use that, that you can tell somebody who's a spiritual orphan for how much they go to law or drivenness.
Yes.
All right.
So
lack of being loved.
Psalm 5 verses 7 says, "But as for me, by your abundant loving kindness, I will enter your house." So how do I get into the house? Not because I became so fearful of you, but because I saw how abundantly loving, how this is the Hebrew word hesed, which is the loving, tender mercy of God.
Yeah.
So by his loving kindness, I enter his house. Because I've caught a vision of his loving kindness, I know the house is always open for me.
Amen.
Now, it says, now the very next verse is, at thy holy temple, I will bow in reverence. Right. And so I come in because of loving kindness, but I find a supreme being who is full of majesty. Right. So it doesn't say I come in because I'm so afraid of him. I come in because I've found that he's so loving and so kind. Right. Which is a fascinating flipping on its head of our present theological systems.
Yeah. And maybe I'll just quickly go over this, everyone. If you're thinking about this, it's important again. I mean, I guess you could sum up again, it's that, Jesus would say it's the stuff that comes out of you that defiles the heart, and most of the time we're not aware of what's really in there unless we're under pressure. And it was interesting. I don't know if I've said this before, but I'll just throw this out. And I really want to just mention Abraham here quickly, but I was sitting down with Father Mike and this monk. You can watch his videos. He's in Iona. Now he has this little hermitage up there in Iona, a little monastery, Father Symeon. Anyway, you type in Orthodox monk Iona or Mull, Mull, it'll come up. So we're sitting down for coffee, and he's not looking me in the eye, because he's never met a charismatic before. He doesn't know what to do with me because he's never met a non-Orthodox guy. So he's like, so finally, I guess he warms up, and he goes, so tell me about yourself. Tell me about, I've never met, I go, well, this is what we believe. And I must have said something about church splits. And he goes, wait, stop. Church split. What is that? I said, well, I think I just went through one or something. And he goes, well, in our culture, we come to a problem about vision or lack of money or something. And one group thinks God is saying one thing, another think God's saying something else, and we go our separate ways. He goes, what? You could do that? You could disagree with somebody and claim that's the will of God? Oh, it goes, how beautiful. It goes, in my church, I'm always wrong. He's like, in our church, when stuff comes up, you're supposed to look in your heart and see what's motivating you out of pride or anger or lust. Could you believe having a theology where you're allowed to blame somebody else and consider it holy? He goes, that's beautiful. It's so wonderful. Wow, that would be so easy. So we just all had a good laugh about that. But that's what we do, right? Because we make it external rather than what's coming up in our heart. And again, that's what we're talking about, Peter and love and all this. But if you don't believe me, go look at Abraham. And super quick, just read it through yourself. He gets his call. I think it's Genesis 12, could be Genesis 17. Off he goes, right? He gets the word of the Lord. Here's your vision. Go to the land I'm sending you. So off he goes. Well, and then Pharaoh takes his wife and he says, hey, better for you, Sarah, because if they see we're together, they're going to kill me. So fear motivation, right? So and then God rescues her. Does God rebuke Abraham? Not at all. He just gives him the vision again. Your descendants will be like the number of the stars. Doesn't say anything. And then they decide to have Ishmael, right? Hey, not having a kid. This is God's fault. Sarah kind of blames the Lord. You know how that goes. God doesn't rebuke him. He gives him another promise. And then a little bit later on, we do the same thing. Abimelech, Sarah's about 90. I don't know. She must have been pretty hot, or Abimelech's eyes were bad. And he says, hey, just take her and go, because he doesn't want to get killed. And here's a big one. God says to Abimelech, you're going to die because, you've taken this guy's wife. He goes, my hands are unclean. I haven't touched her. He goes, I know you have not sinned against me. Now return his wife, because that man's a prophet and he will pray for you and you will live. Now, wait a minute. Abimelech didn't sin. Abraham did, but Abraham gets to pray for Abimelech that he should live. Shouldn't that be the other way around there? Because, and then it says Abraham was a prophet. He prays and God opens the womb of all the women in Abimelech's house because he'd close it right? Now, I mean, right there, God's not punishing Abraham. And then he gives him a promise again. He does not rebuke him. I'm not saying God's, we got to work on our issues. But here's the thing. So finally, after all of this, we get to Isaac being sacrificed. And Abraham makes this different choice. Instead of trying to get out of it, where I think Jacob learned this pattern, by the way. I think it's a family thing. He goes, you know what? God will supply another way. This is the child of destiny he's waited for. Now he's willing. He does not have a fear reaction. He had a fear reaction with Pharaoh. He had a fear reaction around Ishmael. He had a fear reaction around Abimelech. It's gone. It took 25 or 30 years to get it out of him. But now he's not going to go sideways. And, the Lord does that with us. That as we walk with him, things push our buttons, stuff comes up, and Jesus, all things will work out together for good to those who believe. What's he doing? Right. He's healing our soul as we walk with him through life circumstance. He knows what's in there.
Yeah.
He loves us the way we are. Just like he never rebuked Abraham and said, I'm not going to be your father anymore. Screw you. I'm done with all your, he's like, I'm going to work with this. I'm going to put you back together. But it takes, the old saying is, if something's pushing your buttons, you got a button to push and God wants that button. So, we look at the stuff coming up in Peter's heart in his circumstance. He denies Christ. God uses it. You look at the stuff with Abraham, what comes up in his heart under pressure, God uses it. But again, we're looking at medical conditions as the result of the fall that need healing. The Lord did not apply the law to Abraham once.
Yeah.
And does it mean he got away with it? No, it doesn't. But it's a different mindset. And the healing of the soul is that's why these guys we're talking about, the desert fathers, are all living in these places, because they realize that the soul needs to be healed. So, but guess what? That brings you then, once your soul gets healed and you get past this judicial thinking, you're willing to do crazy things for God, like Abraham sacrificing his own son, because you
right.
know the love of God. Or what Jesus is doing with Peter. Peter, I need to move you up a level of love from phileo to agapeo, because I need to heal your soul. It's not about you. It's about my love for you.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
and the seeing of the stuff in our heart, once we are allowed to do it and not expect a rejection or God frowning at us, or and going up a level of love, of desire, because that's how much we are loved. I mean, I think Hebrews 11 says, and Abraham, it depends on your translation, and Abraham considered him faithful who made the promise. In other words, it wasn't about his faith. It was about, well, that guy keeps coming through and he keeps making it work. So therefore, I'm going to keep trusting him,
Right.
because it's not about performance, about love. And eventually you give yourself over to it, because you know what? I get this, Paul, I'm the chief of sinners. It's okay to see the crap in my heart. I can embrace it now, because compared to the great love coming at me while I'm still like this, it's astounding.
That's right. That's right.
And
and
to learn to live there and just be loved like that. So, I mean, so we want God to bump us up all these layers of love. Think about dating somebody. Think about it like that. You're just hanging out as a friend, phileo. Okay. And now you're dating and this agapeo thing is starting to form. But where does that go? Eventually you get married and you go into Eros, right? And the Lord's trying to bring us along into these deeper levels of love, but he's got to shine a brighter light in our hearts and realize, hey, we just got to let him work on that, because he loves us.
Well, and that is, Jesus bringing Peter back to that place of restedness in his love.
Yeah.
And that being the, man being the target of God, who intends to place his heart upon him, that the being of God would be made known through the heart of man, and the being of God being pure love, right? And then that being the natural state of mankind, and Jesus bringing Peter back to that. And that really sets the stage for looking at one of the things we wanted to talk about today is, and we've talked about talking about it, is the bridal intimacy language, because that is the bridal intimacy in a nutshell. Is Jesus, what he's working out our issues, again, not to perfect us in the sense that we think we make all the right decisions and we get everything right.
Yeah.
But to bring us back to that place where the content of our being is the same as the content of his being, in whatever capacity that it can be, right? Where Second Peter 1 says that we become partakers of the divine nature. Well, the divine nature is perfect love. And so he's bringing Peter back to that place of perfect love. And that's what we find when we start looking in the mystical authors, the bridal language of the mystical authors. I want to read an excerpt from, because we want to look at is Bernard of Clairvaux and Symeon, the new theologian. So I want to read this particular passage from Divine Eros.
And maybe I'll just make one statement before you read
go
it,
ahead and make the statement.
So just keep in mind, everybody, of the Lord drawing mankind into these deeper places of love, and the church having figured this out, and these mystical writers like, oh, this is the heart of God. This is what he wants out of mankind. And so, Josh is going to read some of these guys like, oh, goodness gracious. This is what a pure and spotless bride is all about, right? And this healing of the heart to make us ready for the wedding banquet. I'm quoting Paul in like Ephesians 3, but listen to how these guys have worked this out. So anyway, there we go.
Well, and I was trying to find another particular passage from Symeon in the on the mystical life, his book on the mystical life, and the ethical discourses.
I have it sitting right there.
What he's the context for a lot of Symeon's writings when it comes to his theological reflections, right, and his teaching of his disciples. So in Divine Eros, it's full of hymns, that are full of bridal intimacy language, right? But Symeon is in an age where he's arguing back and forth, and one of the things he says, and again, I wish I had it right in front of me, but I don't. Maybe Murray, you can pull up the passage. But essentially, Symeon says, look, there's people that are trying to tell you what the spiritual life is about, but you would never ask someone who's never been to the city to tell you how to navigate the city.
Yes.
Because if they haven't ever been to the city, they can't give you the right directions. And so you're talking with people who have eliminated the place of encountering the love of God. And then you're asking them for instruction, and all they can tell you is about fear, anger, and wrath because they've never seen the city.
Yeah, that's a great way to say it.
So they've got directions that are misconstrued and misguided because they've never been there. And so Symeon is he's talking to his disciples in the sense of in the monastic communities going, there's people who are writing against us, but they've never and they're saying God's not accessible to us today, which is the same things we hear today. God's not accessible to us today. Not in the direct, like I was listening to a video where there was some cessationists talking with continuationists, right? And the cessationists are going, it's essentially every claim that someone had of a, one person. So I had a vision, Jesus stood at the foot of my bed. Well, it's immediately regarded with suspicion by a cessationist because God doesn't move that way anymore. Well, yes. I can't go to you because you've never seen the city then. And then you're claiming authority on the whole system when you've never seen the city. So Symeon would go, don't listen to him. Why would you listen to him when they've never seen the city? If they've seen the city, then they can give you instruction. And they can say, well, that's true and that's not true. But they're just saying nothing's true. So they don't have the right map.
Yes.
If they had the right map, they would be able to help you. But they don't, so don't listen to him. That's what he's saying. And so the map of divine intimacy, the map of encountering the love of God, the map of we've come into his house because of the tenderness of his loving mercy, like this is vitally important for every theologian to understand, and not in a caustic way that, if your paradigm for salvation is because you have a holy God you should be afraid of. Now, again, we've got to make the caveat. We're not saying that God's not holy. We're not saying there's not fear involved. But if that's your system, look, I'm probably don't have a whole lot of time for you. So Symeon says this, unless you want. Oh
no, go ahead. I'm ticking around.
So Symeon says this, and I'm going to pick up in the middle of one of his poems. He goes, but when I begin to mourn like one in despair, then he is seen by me, and he looks at me, who looks upon all things. Amazed, I am astonished at the shapeliness of his beauty, and how the Creator stooped down when he opened the heavens and displayed his unspeakable and strange glory to me. Who therefore shall also come closer to him? Or how shall one be carried up to the immeasurable heights? When I consider this, he himself was found within me, flashing forth within my wretched heart. Yeah. This is vitally important, okay? Symeon is not, he's not like trying to convince everybody that he's super spiritual and perfect. He's very aware that his heart is wretched. But you don't, look, this is the thing. You don't need God to tell you that your heart is wretched. You just need you. Right, people have whole systems of thought around trying to convince you that humanity is good. It's not. It doesn't take anything but a cursory look at history to realize that humankinds are pretty awful. Humankinds have the propensity and the possibility of creating great, great evil, and we've done it consistently throughout all of history. Okay? So you don't need God to show you that. You don't even need the scriptures to show you that. Yeah. All you need is a reflection on your own life and a reflection on human history, and it'll show you that. That's all you need. Okay? The scriptures help us, and then God illuminates things. But Symeon goes, my heart is wretched, but he shined forth within me anyway. This is bridal intimacy language. Flashing forth within my wretched heart. Illuminating me from all directions with immortal radiance, shining upon all my members with his rays, folding his entire self around me, he tenderly kisses all of me. He gives his whole self to me, the unworthy, and I take my fill of his love and beauty, and I am filled full of divine pleasure and sweetness. See, what we've talked about the language of divine, or the language of the bridal paradigm in history. Well, with Symeon, you start to see this real maturation of what it actually means to be in that place of sweet intimacy. I love how he says, and so anyone that can resonate with this and say, I can tell you that I've had an experience where he's given himself to me. I'm unworthy, but I've taken my fill of his love and beauty. He's encompassed me all about. He's kissed me tenderly, and I'm filled with divine pleasure and sweetness. Unless someone can say, this is when that happened to me, I just wouldn't listen to him.
Yeah.
Because I don't think they have the map. I just don't think they have the map.
And you know, I'll read that one prayer too.
Yeah.
Just because if you look at that experience of having the map, how do you begin to read it? And I'll just read this one thing. This is also out of Divine Eros. Thou, O Christ, art the kingdom of heaven. Thou, O Christ, art you are the land promised to the meek. Thou, the meadow land of paradise. Thou art the celestial banquet. Thou art the ineffable bridal chamber. Sorry, guys, I'm getting this off the internet here. I could have found my book of thou, the table set for all, the bread of life, the unheard of drink, both of the yearn for the water and the life-giving water. You are the inextinguishable lamp for each one of the saints, the garment and the crown of one who bestows the crowns, the joy and the rest, the delight and the glory, the gladness and the mirth, and the great grace of the Spirit of all sanctity. Will shine like the sun in all the saints. The unapproachable sun will shine in their midst and will shine brightly according to the measure of their faith. Their asceticism, their hope, and their love will be illumined by the Spirit. I mean, wow. I mean, he's like,
yeah.
But, you know, you have to be willing to, you know, have you ever, you know, I remember this time. I'll just share this one little thing. I was young. I was like 8 or 10 or something. And all my relatives were talking in the other room. And I found a quarter on the floor in the kitchen. And I was like, oh, yeah. Because a quarter back then, you got a pretty good load of candy for a quarter back in 1975. So I picked it up and I put it in my pocket. And I walked past everybody outside, I think presumably on my way to the candy store. And I remember my dad looking at me as I walked by going, oh no, he knows. And I got out the door and he came and said, so what's going on? And I remember I blushed and I held out the quarter and he goes, okay. And he took it back. You can't be taking people's money. But then he gave me this really, really big hug, if I remember correctly, you know, that because I was looking at my shoes, I was looking down. I didn't want to look him in the eye because I felt so guilty. And yet in that moment, it actually produced this wonderful encounter of, you know, my dad loving me in the midst of my manipulation, if you want to use that word.
Yeah.
And the thing is, that taught me more about so I'm not saying, hey, go sin and God will love you more, but it showed me that in the midst of my heart and its wickedness, that the Father would receive me. And the problem is that when we don't know the Father's love for us and the Son's love for us, and God wants to bump us up these levels of love,
yeah,
and we start staring at our shoes because we don't measure up, that hinders our growth and our ability to see the celestial banquet, our ability to see the love of the Father, because we're the ones not looking up, judging ourselves based on our own performance rather than on the Lord's love. And you know, when you look at these guys talking, they've looked up and they allowed the Lord to love on them. They looked up and they went, oh my goodness. You know, Saint Symeon says a lot. I'm the chief of sinners. And you know, why does he do that? Well, when you experience such a radical love of God, you also kind of see all the dirt inside the chamber, you know, but
yeah.
You know, one thing I'll just share this one last thought here, but because like, how do you work on that? And maybe I've said this before, but it's worth putting right here. 1910, somewhere really, maybe even a little earlier. I don't know how they would have got the picture, but there is this guy, you know, maybe in Dodge, or some boom town, Boot Hill, I don't know, some Western town, right? And he used to be the town bum, and he got saved, became the pastor, he became the preacher. And I guess he's causing some trouble for all the saloon owners because people are getting saved and they're not going into their bars so much. So they take a picture of him they had of him laying in the gutter with the pigs, and they put it up on the front door of his church. So he comes to church one morning, and there's all his parishioners lined up, and they're looking at something. He goes up the steps, and there's a picture of him drunk out of his mind with the pigs. Takes the picture down. Everybody kind of humbly goes into the church silent. And he takes that same picture, and he takes a hammer, and he hammers that thing, and he puts it on the front of his pulpit. And he says, I once was lost, but now I see. I was blind. I once was lost. Now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. And he realizes that what he's trying to tell his congregation is, look how much God loves me that he could take such a broken person and change him. And if we could look at the Lord's love like that in comparison to our sin, we would be living as sons and daughters. We'd be living in bridal intimacy. But if we look at all the muck of our past and everything and go, wow, just like those saloon owners wanted to make him and his church look at him, we would be living as orphans and denying this love of God. And so, and I we're looking at people in the Desert Fathers who met this radical loving God and realized who they were, not in their fasting or their asceticism, but because they're so loved.
Yeah.
And because of that, they want to pursue God. And as St. Augustine said, God first sought us so that we may learn to seek him. And if we seek out of a bridal paradigm of being loved and in part of the family, and we realize, stuff's going to come up in my heart. There's junk in there. I'm going to sin and fall over. But it's like my dad interrupting me stealing that quarter. Or this pastor, if we see it that way, or as Julian of Norwich said, when God sees our sin, he sees our pain. We can go into these higher levels of the love of God because we realize we're invited in on a journey of change, not a journey of having to fulfill the law in any way to be good enough, because we'll never be good enough.
No.
But it's love by, so then why do we do it if we can't earn it? Well, I mean, when you met your wife or your spouse or, and you were in love and you gave them an engagement ring that day, would you have gone and slept around or looked at another woman in lust? Probably not. Why? Because you were so in love. There's no way you would want to do that to the heart of your fiance, because you were compelled by love to do the right thing, not by the law. And so again, what's compelling us? And once you have this map of love and you're walking by it, it inspires you to walk the journey. Why? Because you can't live without more of the love of God. So we're right back to, Song of Solomon, really right there. Because of the Shulamite having to go and pursue the lover because she can't help herself.
That's right. Well, let me. I just want to read. I'm going to read one or two more passages from Symeon, and then end on Bernard because we've got to wrap it up. We're reaching our time. And I found the reference I wanted for Symeon. He said this: someone who explains something about, for example, a house or a city or a place and its arrangement and condition, or again about some theater and what goes on inside it, is obliged first of all to have seen the places and have learned well about them, and then afterwards to speak carefully and accurately about what he wants to cover. If he were not to have seen it beforehand, then what in fact could he really say about it? What notion regarding something he had not seen at all about could he otherwise provide for his account? So Symeon's point is, if you're going to try and speak on things of encountering God, being with him, experiencing his love, being filled with his presence, and all of these things, then if you've never experienced it, you have no place to speak on it. You're just speaking with empty words. To who have experienced it and then to speak on it. So he actually talks about people that claim to have the Holy Spirit, but are I've got a quote right out here. He goes, people that claim to have the Holy Spirit but are deaf to him. How can they possibly talk about him? Like, if you claim to have the Holy Spirit but are deaf to him, then you don't have the Holy Spirit. So,
yeah, that's a big statement.
It is.
That's why we like Saint Symeon, everybody, because he's very much into encounter and hearing. You know, he's like, yeah, we claim him as part of the
if it's the case that you have received him, that you have been touched by him, that you've been changed by him, then how can you say that and be deaf to him? That's his whole point, right? He has to be speaking to you from within. And then, so that is Symeon in a nutshell. And this is where we start to get a real mature type of language when it comes to bridal intimacy in this bridal paradigm. And then you also see it in Bernard of Clairvaux, which you see shades of earlier authors. Here's a quote from him. He says, "Fear motivates a slave's attitude to his master, gain that of a wage earner to his employer. The learner is attentive to his teacher, the son is respectful to his father. But the one who asks for a kiss, she is a lover. Among all," and would be a comment, of course, on the Song of Solomon. "Among all the natural endowments of a man, love holds first place, especially when it's directed to God, who is the source from where it comes. No sweeter name can be found to embody that sweet interflow of affections between the word and the soul than the bridegroom and the bride." And so he's talking, maybe not quite as poetically as Symeon, but he's illuminating on the exact same thing. That we can use all kinds of metaphors to talk about how we relate to God, and fear is the motivation of a slave. So someone who has stuck in a slave-like mentality is stuck in a fear-based paradigm, right? Someone who's stuck in a wage-based paradigm, this is what you benefit from it, is an employer paradigm. God's my employer. He gives me something that makes me happy. Someone who has a teacher-based paradigm is going, I'm always learning from God. Someone who has a father paradigm is respectful to God, but someone who has a lover paradigm, hey, well, now we're talking about the interplay of the word and the soul, the bridegroom and the bride. This is beautiful. This is being filled with his love and beauty, filled full of divine pleasure and sweetness. And as far as Symeon's concerned, and as far as Bernard is concerned, the only thing that transforms the heart is an encounter with the love and the sweetness and the tenderness of the Father, being pierced by his love. And that's a practical, tangible experience. That's not a philosophical experiment. That's not a thought-based experiment. That's not an ideology that you believe. That is something that actually happens to you, overwhelms you, and changes who you are. Love in and love out. And this is what we look at when Murray and I read something like John 21, what we see in John 21 is that love is coming into Peter. Jesus is establishing again the kind of love that is, and then it moves out from Peter. Yeah. And Peter is being constantly perfected in the image of God, and that image is perfect love.
Amen.
And so this is the bridal paradigm in a nutshell. Yeah. And I think with that, Murray, we have to call this.
I will just 30 seconds. Everybody. Speaking of encountering that love, I'd really recommend reading a couple of books on by Brennan Manning. So he started out life as a Catholic priest, and then became an evangelical pastor, and then became a alcoholic living on the streets of New Orleans, dragged into a recovery house and met God as Father. So when he writes about God as Father, or who Jesus is, it's brilliant. And I'd really recommend, if you're coming out of these mindsets of judicial or orphan, or read Abba's Child by Brennan Manning, or the Relentless Tenderness of Jesus.
That's another really good one.
I just love that book. So
it's not, when you're talking about Brennan Manning, like, we're not trying to claim that these people are, because I know there's some people out there that'll go, well, he's not a very good Reformed theologian, right? Well, we're not talking about, we're not going, yeah, he's going to put together a full systematic theology for you, but he's someone that saw something and came back with something to say. And so that's why we'll listen. That's why I will listen to him.
And he's urging you and I, who read his books, to come back and see
same thing that he saw. Yeah, that's
which is why I'm recommending it, because it's available to you. And sometimes, depending on our upbringing or thinking, we need somebody to go, hey, listen. You know
what people can say about Brennan Manning is they go, well, he failed later, right? He went back into alcoholism, and and his life fell apart. And I would say this, I'd say if he had never encountered the love of God and understood the Father the way he did, he'd never even get to that point.
Absolutely.
Because he would have died on the streets when he, 50 years previous. So the fact that he lasted that long and held on to that long, now he did fail at the end. We're not saying he didn't, but the fact that he held on to that long means, hey, there's something to say about what he encountered there. And what he says rings true to what we see in Symeon, what we see in Bernard,
for sure.
what we see in other authors as well. So with that said, everyone, we're going to wrap this episode to a close. We've got more planned on the bridal paradigm as we've been talking through this. As with all things, Murray and I, we tend to talk a lot. We start a topic and then go, oh, there's a lot to say.
Yeah, it's shocking.
Yeah, so there we are. And so I'll say until next week, everyone, it's been awesome. And Murray, it's always a pleasure to hang out with you.
Thank you, my friend.
And everybody else, God bless. And Murray, I guess, God bless. I don't mean God not bless Murray. Yes. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.